I'm going to read from this book now. This is from the Natural History Library. Early Man in the New World. Kenneth McGowan and Joseph A. Hester Jr. are the authors. All right, we go to chapter 6 of this book, and it says here, what the bones have to say. Prophesy upon these bones. Ezekiel 37:4. There was still no conflict between the religion and the science of man when word came from Missouri in 1838 of the first linking of the fossils of an extinct animal with signs of human activity. Dr. A.C. Koch, a German who collected fossils and sold them to museums, dug up the bones of a mastodon. Further, Koch found evidence of fire among the bones and also numerous stones which seemed to have been carried to the spot and thrown at the unhappy animal as it stood bogged in a swamp. 2 years later, in the same state, Koch made upon another mastodon as well as a spear point lying beneath it. From a chain of descriptions of the weapon, it may be that Koch found the first of those unique flooded spear points that were to turn up 90 years later among the fossils of extinct bison and mammoths. While Koch was circusing his mastodon up and down the country as the Missourium, the first scientific paper appeared on a New World find of a human skulls and the fossils of extinct animals. This was the 1842 report of the Danish naturalist P. W. Lund on the Lagoa Santa caves of Brazil. 4 years later, M. W. Dickinson reported a petrified human pelvis from Natchez, Mississippi. In 1849, the British scientist Sir Charles Lyell describes his visit to the spot, and in 1863 he pointed out that the pelvis was quite as fossilized as some mammoth bones that had been found near it. Neither of these finds aroused any more enthusiasm or controversy than Koch's. It was all very curious and interesting, but perfectly acceptable. There was no question of the man and the elephants being particularly ancient, just antediluvian. Agassiz' glacial hypothesis was hardly known. Louis Agassiz, remember, he was the guy who said that the oldest land in the world is in America. And Darwin had not yet turned back time past the Garden of Eden. Adam and the Bible were safe enough, all right? So this is all before Darwinism and Agassiz. So they're saying as long as they're saying it's older than Adam, everything was fine back then. They were finding things millions of years old. They were okay, well, thousands of years old. Well, it's still not as old as Adam. So it was okay with it back then. But this is before their whole, doctrine of how old man's supposed to be in America. Science and religion embattled. But by the time the next few finds began to be discussed, the spiritual and intellectual climate had changed. A wind of the glaciers chilled the enthusiasm of the churchly and banished bland talk of antediluvian antiquities. Agassiz and Darwin and early man had to go down together or triumph at the expense of Genesis. The issue was joined. The church man grew bitter and blind, the scientist ardent and uncritical. Of the many conflicts and controversies, the most celebrated raged around the Calaveras skull. Okay, again, I did a whole video on this. You guys gotta go check it out. It's a really good video. Proven that this was a real archaeological find, a real fossil, and it was found in the place they say they found it, and it is that old. All right, except for the fact that in this case, the churchmen seem to have been right and the scientists wrong. It was characteristic of most of the disputes over early man. Fittingly enough, the skull was found in the California county which Mark Twain made famous about the same time by his own discovery of the celebrated jumping frog. There is no question that a mined operator with a reputation for veracity far superior to Mark Twain's truthful James found the thing in a shaft 130 feet below the surface. There is also no question that the skull, with its heavy brow ridges, was fossilized and encrusted with the kind of gravel that distinguishes California mines. Unfortunately, the skull proved too much, or seemed to. It lay under 4 strata of lava and 3 of gold-bearing gravels, and therefore belonged to a very least to the Pliocene period. Again, millions of years old. A human skull in California, the Calaveras skull. Go check my video on it, which ended some millions of years ago. Unless, of course, a practical joker has salted the mine, some scientists accepted the skull, Some preachers and religious editors were content with evidence from Holy Writ. All right. So when they say some scientists accepted the skull, they don't just mean any scientists. These were the leading men in their fields. All right. The leading men in the Geological Survey of California. All right. So even the preachers were accepting it, I guess, but most of them preferred the practical joke argument. Various wits and various victims were involved, but the most popular explanation held that the mine operator was known as an agnostic, and that certain miners thought it would be amusing to plant fake evidence for him to embrace, which presumes a considerable amount of churchly enthusiasm in the miners of Calaveras County. Yeah, so we break down the silly story about the practical joke in my video. Go check it out. It's very silly. Science asks where the miners could have got so ancient and fossilized a skull, because the skull was still fossilized. Where did they find that one then? And a few scientists and a good many Protestants replied that the name of the county had come from the Spanish word for skulls, Calaveras, because whole skeletons and uneasy crania were constantly turning up in its soil, in its riverbeds, in California. The controversy raged through the 1870s and gained new vigor in 1880 when J.D. Whitney, a leading geologist of his day and director of the California Geological Survey, brought out auriferous gravels of the Sierra Nevada of California. In the 14th year since the discovery of the skull, Whitney has studied the region thoroughly and gathered data from everyone who remembered the circumstances of the find. He concluded that the skull had been discovered in situ and had not been planted. Some 25 years later, when the religious fury of the attacks had subsided, Alex Hidrikla produced craniums from the caves of California that were quite as fossilized as the Calaveras skull and showed the same heavy brow ridges. He had to admit, however, that the ridges of the Calaveras skull extended clear across the eyes and nose, a much less common form. In the days of Queen Victoria, scientists were sometimes as extravagant in their claims for early man in the Americas as the fundamentalists were observed in their attacks upon him. Fiorino Ameghino, a museum director of Buenos Aires, got a hearing for what he called evidences of Argentine man in an age when the mammals had only just reached ascendancy. He made his initial discovery at 19. That was in 1873. For 40 or 50 years, he went on making find after find and raising controversy after controversy. The fossilized bones of man and mammal that he discovered at 19, he placed in the Pliocene epoch, again, millions of years old in Argentina, prior to the Great Ice Age. Geologists claim that the stratum where he made his finds is of the Ice Age or later. Much the same criticism applied to most of Ameghino's discoveries. He set up 4 primitive types of early man based on the discovery of various bones and placed the first of the Miocene epoch more than 15 million years ago. The geologists again put his strata in the glacial period. Anthropologists and paleontologists were quite as annoyed as the geologists when Ameghino made Argentina the center from which all human and mammalian forms spread over the world. Yet in spite of Ameghino's extravagant claims and others that were somewhat less extravagant, belief in early man persisted and grew. There was considerable stir when between 1872 and 1899, C.C. Abbott and others discovered some primitive stone implements, parts of a human thigh bone, jaw, and skull in glacial gravels near Trenton, New Jersey. There were more finds at other sites, and by 1890 it was generally conceded by scientists that man had invaded the Americas during or close to the time of the last glaciers. The Protestant church subsided into a quietude which was not to be broken until the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Continuing the book a little further ahead, it says North American skulls and bones. Since the discovery of human bones in glacial gravels near Trenton, New Jersey, 3 skeletons of some importance and a number of skulls that resemble those of Lagoa, Santa, and Punin have been found in the United States. So they're naming places in Brazil where they also found bones of humans, with extinct animals and mammals. The 3 finds of complete skeletons made in Minnesota between 1931 and 1935 have aroused much debate. All 3 were encountered in road making or the digging of gravel, and scientists were not present at their discovery. A.E. Jang's study of these skeletons has done much to clarify them. Minnesota Man, really a girl, was found in a geological stratum marked by barbs of thin layer of clay laid down in successive years by a glacial lake about 11,000 years ago. Antis believes her body was thrust into this stratum at a later time, but other geological authorities, including Kirk, Brian, Paul McClinton, JFK, and Layton, deny it and present rather convincing evidence. Houghton unhesitantly expresses the opinion that this discovery establishes very strong probability, though not an absolute certainty, of the existence of Homo sapiens in the New World in late glacial times. Thousands of years before the elephants and the men of our three-ring circuses took up winter quarters in Florida, a different kind of elephant and a different kind of man seem to have come into contact there along the Indian River. It was very firm contact indeed, for if evidence dug up at Melbourne in 1925 means anything, it means that a mammoth or a mastodon stepped on the skull of some variety of early man and left it flat as a pancake. Other elephants and a godly array of mammals that are now extinct left some of their bones in the same geologic formation with the skull. 10 years before, other such fossils and an even more mutilated skull had been found in the same kind of stratum 40 miles away at Vero Beach. The history of these finds is typical of the disrepute in which early man was held from 1900 to 1930. A few men, E. H. Sellards, who made the Vero find, J. W. Gidley and F. B. Loomis, who published on both sides, and some others believed the evidences, but that doughty doubter, Hadrilica, bore down upon it and left it as flattened as the Melbourne skull. It was only in 1946, through a study by T.D. Stewart, curator of physical anthropology in the National Museum, that the finds received a fair estimate as proof of early man in Florida during glacial or near glacial time. Besides upholding the geologic evidence of Sellards, Gidley, and Loomis, Stewart announced that Hidrilica had left the reconstruction of the Melbourne skull to a minor technician, and Stewart showed by a more careful fitting together of the broken pieces of bone that the Melbourne man had the long, narrow, flat-sided head, the low forehead, and the strong broad ridges typical of most craniums found under conditions that suggest antiquity. There are no radiocarbon dates, but fluorine tests which tell us whether neighboring materials are of the same age indicate that men saw elephants at Vero Beach, right? In Florida, men with elephants in Florida, okay? Ancient man, ancient elephants in America, in Florida. Other skulls with the peculiarities of the Melbourne and South American specimens have been found in the United States and Mexico. Most of them were fairly close to the surface and soils of recent times. Only a few were found in geological formations old enough to be worth discussion. The Lansing, Kansas skull, for instance, which was buried under 20 feet of loess, and certain skulls found below Harpin in California, and none of these won general acceptance as anywhere near glacial age. Yet in a number of skulls discovered in Texas, Lower California, the California coastal area, and the Sacramento Valley, there remains a case for early man in North America.
The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Kurimeo. In 1880, J.D. Whitney, the state geologist of California, published a lengthy review of advanced stone tools found in California gold mines. The implements, including spear points and stone mortars and pestles, were found deep in mine shafts, underneath thick, undisturbed layers of lava, in formations ranging from 9 million to over 55 million years old.
As part of the research for this book, I went to the San Diego Natural History Museum and interviewed Dr. Tom Desmarais, who's the chief paleontologist there. The reason I interviewed him was because he'd just had an extraordinary paper published in Nature in April 2017. And that paper documents human presence in North America 130,000 years ago. That's 10 times as old as the Clovis culture.
Because we now know that human beings have been in the Americas for tens of thousands of years, before 13,400 years ago. In fact, the latest evidence puts them back more than 130,000 years in the Americas. And what that says to me is, if they were saying before that humans didn't come until 13,400 years ago and nobody should look, nobody should dig deeper, now we know they were there 130,000 years ago. That's more than 100,000 years of the American story that has not been told entirely because of the dogmatism of archaeology. And now reluctantly they're having to accept, all of the institutions are accepting, well, we're sorry, we got it wrong. But it's not just a matter of getting it wrong. It's a grave responsibility to be the profession that interprets the prehistory of humanity to the modern world. And it's a betrayal of that responsibility to be so dogmatic and to refuse to consider any possibility which doesn't fit with one's preconceived notions. And, you know, the net result is that we're left with 100,000 years of North American prehistory, which has been completely unstudied, and they're only now beginning to study it. And the evidence that's coming out, both in North America and South America, is absolutely stunning.
The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Kurimeo. In the early 1950s, Thomas Ely of the Natural Museum of Canada found advanced stone tools in glacial deposits at Cheguanda on Mount Nitoline Island in northern Lake Huron. Geologist John Sanford of Wayne State University argued that the oldest Cheguanda tools were at least 65,000 years old and might be as much as 125,000 years old. For those adherent to standard views of North American prehistory, such ages were unacceptable. Humans supposedly first entered North America from Siberia about 12,000 years ago. Alright, so as you can see, their chronology and their history does not fit with what has been found many times. All right.
And I felt that my role has been to present solid, well-researched, thoroughly documented evidence which challenges that idea. Because if we are missing a very big part of our story, then we don't know who we are. We are lost in the modern world, and that's why I say it's a grave responsibility to be an archaeologist and to interpret the past to the present, because our ideas of who we are come from the story we've been told about that past. And now we know that an enormous area of the world, the whole of the Americas, was completely ignored, and it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. And it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization. And it may in fact have been the center of the origins of civilization.